Hello and welcome. I'm Rawia Alami and this is the Dailies, where we take a look at important news stories, reports, analysis and articles published in newspapers and media outlets across the world. All newspapers reported on America's strikes against Iran's nuclear sites using bunker buster bombs, with a special focus on what prompted the change of heart of President Trump on whether to be directly involved in the war or not. Some media outlets went as far as saying that Trump's talk about the decision taking up to 2 weeks to be finalized was a decoy tactic. We'll start with the New York Times, which published an analysis on how President Trump decided to strike Iran. The article reveals how President Trump secretly prepared to strike Iran's nuclear sites while publicly pretending to give diplomacy a chance. For days, President Trump publicly claimed he might wait up to 2 weeks before deciding on military action, hoping to mislead Iran and also calm his own anti-war supporters. The analysis highlights that behind the scenes, military preparations were already complete. Refueling tankers and fighter jets were also moved into place, and B-2 stealth bombers were ready to launch a complex attack. To confuse Iran, some bombers flew west as a decoy, while the main group flew east undetected to strike Iran's most fortified nuclear facilities. Trump gave the final order less than 30 hours after his press secretary announced the supposed 2-week delay. Now, the attack was successful, but officials warned that Iran's nuclear program might not be fully destroyed. The piece notes that Trump's decision put the U.S. directly into the war, with risks of Iranian retaliation and a possible wider conflict. The analysis concludes that Trump's deception was as much about managing public opinion as it was about surprising Iran. The Jerusalem Post published an exclusive report on how Netanyahu convinced Trump to strike Iran's nuclear sites. The report highlights how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer spent a week persuading President Trump to expand U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. It points out that Trump initially planned to target only Fordo, but he was convinced by Israel to include Natanz and Esfahan to finish the job and also maximize the damage to Iran's nuclear program. Now, the piece notes that Israel provided crucial intelligence and full cooperation for the U.S. operation, and that both countries used deception to keep Iran off guard. The report concludes that while most of Iran's nuclear sites have been destroyed or severely damaged, Israel is now shifting focus to Iran's missile program, with both leaders declaring a major step towards preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. The Financial Times published an analysis asking where is Iran's uranium, saying the fate of the American strikes hangs on Iran's 400 kilograms stockpile of uranium. The piece also highlights ongoing uncertainty about the fate of Iran's nuclear program after U.S. and Israeli strikes on key sites like Natanz and also Fordo and Isfahan. It points out that while these facilities have suffered severe damage, the critical question is what happened to Iran's stockpile of over 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to near weapons grade, enough for several bombs if further processed. The report included a chart depicting the rapid expansion of Iran nuclear activity in the past few years. If we look at it here, this is the chart. As you can see, after May 2018, when President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the nuclear deal with Iran, of course, this activity increased rapidly between May 2018 and May 2025, reaching much higher levels. And you can see that that was also planned at the end. A much higher level was planned of activity was indeed planned. Now, the piece points out that officials and analysts warn that Iran may have moved its enriched uranium to secret locations, making it hard for international inspectors to track. It also notes that the IAEA's ability to monitor Iran's nuclear activities has been weakened, and that military action alone may only delay, not destroy Iran's nuclear ambitions. Now, the report also concludes that without knowing the whereabouts of the uranium stockpile, any claims of total victory are premature. Le Monde's editorial "So in America" strikes on Iran a dramatic shift in U.S. policy from diplomacy to military action, saying that by striking Iran, Trump has deprived himself of the tool of diplomacy. The article points out that President Trump, after initially advocating for talks, was drawn into war by Israel's actions and now leads an unprecedented Israeli-American military alliance in the region. The editorial notes that Trump's warning to Iran about peace or tragedy, but also emphasizes that Iran remains capable of causing major disruption despite its weakened state. Now, the piece also questions the long-term effectiveness of the bombings, as they are unlikely to end Iran's nuclear ambitions and have cost the U.S. its diplomatic leverage. The article concludes that relying on brute force over international law has darkened prospects for peace and stability in the Middle East. Simon Tisdall wrote in The Guardian today saying Trump has fallen slap bang into the trap laid for him by Netanyahu, and that his reckless gamble makes a nuclear weapon for Iran more, not less likely. The article highlights that U.S. airstrikes on Iran's nuclear sites have plunged the U.S. into the new war in the Middle East with far-reaching consequences. It points out that President Trump's decision, urged on by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, was based on disputed intelligence and lacks a clear exit strategy. Tisdall warns that bombing will not erase Iran's nuclear know-how or its regional influence, and that retaliation against U.S. and allied bases is now a real danger. He notes that Iran may choose to accelerate its nuclear program in response, possibly withdrawing from international treaties. The article concludes that the attack risks triggering a regional firestorm, global economic shocks, and a dangerous precedent for nuclear proliferation, making peace harder to achieve than ever. David Ignatius seems to agree with this assessment, as he wrote in the Washington Post, saying President Trump's bold decision to strike Iran's nuclear sites was a gamble that may bring Tehran to the table or provoke another round of escalation. Ignatius points out that the operation was larger and more comprehensive than expected, showcasing American strength and reach. The author also notes that Trump's demands for Iran to make peace or face more attacks is an ultimatum that could backfire, as history shows U.S. military action in the region rarely end well. Vice President Vance later also offered a gentler tone, emphasizing openness to diplomacy if Iran abandons its nuclear ambition. The article concludes that while Trump's gamble may force Iran to the table, it could also provoke prolonged instability, retaliation, and unpredictable consequences for the region and beyond. We'll stay with the Washington Post, which published an analysis on what to expect in terms of oil prices if Iran carries out its threats to close the Strait of Hormuz. The report highlights how the U.S. strikes on Iran have sent shockwaves through world oil markets, as Iran's parliament has endorsed the idea of closing the Strait of Hormuz. The piece points out that this narrow waterway is crucial for global oil and gas shipments, with about 20% of the world's supply passing through it. Analysts also warn that if Iran blocks the strait, oil prices could spike above $100 per barrel, and U.S. gas prices could rise also sharply. The report also notes that while Iran has threatened to close the strait before, it has never fully done so and may lack the ability now. It concludes that while oil prices are likely to surge into the short term, any major spike may be temporary unless Iran makes a dramatic move. And we'll end with The Telegraph, which reported today on President Trump's mixed signals regarding regime change in Iran. While the official American stance does not name regime change as an objective, President Trump's social media posts say otherwise. The report points out that the U.S. president referenced his MAGA movement as he asked, why wouldn't there be a regime change? The report highlights that President Trump's call for regime change in Iran, using his Truth Social platform to suggest new leadership is needed if the current government couldn't make Iran great again. Of course, a twist on his MAGA slogan. However, the piece also points out that Vice President Vance and Defense Secretary Hegseth have both stressed that the U.S. is not seeking to topple Iran's government, but only to end its nuclear program, and also open talks for a long-term settlement. The piece also notes that Trump previously blocked an Israeli plan to assassinate Iran's supreme leader, and that senior U.S. officials warned regime change could cause chaos in the region. The report concludes that while Trump celebrates the military success, experts and officials remain cautious about the risk of escalation and the uncertain future for Iran. That's it for today. Thanks for watching.